DeVonta Smith was the story of the game as Alabama thumps Ohio State 52-24 to take home another national championship. First, I'd like to acknowledge that the majority of the people who watch our videos aren't subscribed to the channel. Help us out by subscribing and joining us on our way to 100K because it's coming fast and you don't want to miss your opportunity to enlist in the J&D Army. DeVonta Smith had a national championship record 12 receptions for 215 yards and 3 touchdowns. Oh, that was just in the first half. Smith was not only 6 yards away from tying the receiving yards record for the game, but he had 24 more yards than Ohio State in total going into the break. I can't explain how well DeVonta Smith played in the first half. Twitter was erupting the entire time. It seemed like Ohio State, no matter what they did, he was still going to break away and find the end zone. At one point, they were even playing zone, and for some reason, a linebacker ended up on DeVonta. Of course, you can guess how that play probably ended out. This game was absolutely loaded with future NFL talent. About 30 players in the contest are potential selections in the 2021 NFL Draft, including around 10 that are projected to go in the first round, headlined of course by Justin Fields and Smith. A huge narrative going into the game was the return of Jalen Waddle. Waddle, a top wide receiver in the upcoming draft class, only played in 4 games this year with a broken ankle he suffered in late October. He finally made his return to the field in the national championship. A lot of people have a lot of bold opinions about Waddle actually coming and playing in this game. I mean, he was visibly hurt for what seemed like the entirety of the game. Even on drives where he was actually playing, he'd play a couple plays and then he'd go back to the sideline, and Waddle was clearly in pain for what seemed to be the entire game. But hey, that's a tough kid playing in his final college game, and we'll see him in the NFL next year either way. Additionally, the Crimson Tide lost defensive back Jordan Battle to targeting in the second quarter, which was a pretty big loss to the Alabama secondary. Ohio State took arguably a bigger blow when Trey Sermon suffered a shoulder injury on his first play of the game. Sermon ended up not even returning and went to a nearby hospital to get evaluated. Now, both of these squads did come into the game undefeated, Alabama at 12-0 and Ohio State at 7-0. The number 1 Crimson Tide took down number 4 Notre Dame convincingly 31-14 in the Rose Bowl to make the national championship. Meanwhile, the number 3 Buckeyes just absolutely walloped number 2 Clemson in the Sugar Bowl. The Crimson Tide looked like they were going to run away with this game very early. They completely shut down Fields on the Buckeyes opening drive before they went on to capitalize on their first drive, converting on 4th and goal with a Najee Harris touchdown run. The Buckeyes quickly responded on their next possession, capping off the drive with a Master Teague rushing score, who of course was in the game because of Sermon's injury. On the drive though, it was Jeremy Ruckert who was actually able to get Ohio State down into field position after he had a very impressive one-handed catch to get in the red zone. On Alabama's next possession, they converted again on 4th down in the red zone before Mac Jones hit Smith for a score to go back on top, DeVonta Smith's first touchdown of the game. Soon after, Ohio State forced a huge turnover, recovering a Mac Jones fumble in the Alabama red zone. The Buckeyes capitalized on it with another Teague rushing score to even the game up at 14, but from there it got a little bit out of hand. Shortly after, Harris scored again to put Alabama back up after making a ton of plays in the open field after catching a short lob pass from Jones and eventually just hurtling into the end zone. Ohio State added a field goal shortly after. Now, as if DeVonta Smith hadn't quite gotten his point across that Ohio State couldn't even hold his jockstrap in this game, Smith decided to score again to make it 28-17 Alabama. Then less than 2 minutes later, Smith scored on a 42-yard reception for his 3rd score of the game. This is all still in the first half. Alabama ended up taking a huge 35-17 lead into the half. The Crimson Tide outgained the Buckeyes 389-190 in the period. The two passers had very different stat lines at the break, to say the least. Jones was 25 of 30 for 342 yards and 4 touchdowns, while Fields was just 6 of 15 for 90 yards. The Crimson Tide had their way with the Buckeyes the entire game before the convincing victory, with DeVonta Smith leading the way after a dominant first half, despite going down in the second half and missing the remainder of the contest. Najee Harris, Mac Jones, and Jalen Waddle, returning from injury, were all able to pick up the slack in the dominant Alabama win. Even in the first Alabama possession of the second half, with Smith out due to injury and Waddle literally waddling around on the field, the Crimson Tide still hit a field goal to make it a 4-possession game. Smith ended up getting tangled up and it looked like he might have suffered a finger injury. He spent a very long time in the medical tent before going to the locker room. Smith did eventually return though with a cast on his hand. Ohio State was able to cut the Alabama lead to 14 as Fields hit Garrett Wilson for a 20-yard score. Alabama Alabama had an answer of its own shortly after, though, with Jones hitting Slade Bolden to go up 45-24. On the ensuing drive, Ohio State was stopped on 4th down. In the 4th, Harris found pay dirt once again for the Crimson Tide, just further ending the hopes of a Buckeyes comeback attempt before the clock hit 0 in a 52-24 victory for Alabama. Justin Fields finished the contest with a mere 194 yards and a score. Mac Jones, on the other hand, broke the national championship record with 464 yards, and he threw for 5 touchdowns. On the ground, Master Teague ran for 65 yards and 2 scores for the Buckeyes. Meanwhile, Najee Harris had 79 yards and found the end zone twice. Alabama looked great in this game, but I'm sure all they wanted is the clock to hit 0. DeVonta Smith was in the locker room with his finger injury, Jalen Waddle was barely walking around, and Mac Jones was also just hobbling around the field after suffering an injury later in the game. All 3 of those dudes are future 2021 NFL draft picks, and Alabama probably just wanted to get them out of there healthy. A lot will change for both of these teams after the contest. Obviously, Justin Fields is heading off to the league from Ohio State, while Alabama loses most of its top players: Mac Jones, DeVonta Smith, Jalen Waddle, Najee Harris, etc. Additionally, Alabama offensive coordinator Steve Sarkisian is leaving to go take the head coach job at the University of Texas, and former Houston Texans head coach Bill O'Brien is going to take his role. Alabama is going to look very different, but the most important man remains in Tuscaloosa: Nick Saban. Saban now has 7 national championships, and I can't imagine this was his last either. At the end of the day, the Alabama Crimson Tide was just too much for the Ohio State Buckeyes. A truly incredible season for Alabama, capping it off at 13-0 with plenty of playmakers along the way. Mac Jones looking towards the NFL, and of course, this season, more than anything for Alabama, is going to be remembered as the year that Mac Jones took over as a starter and DeVonta Smith was able to help lead Alabama to the national championship game and clinch Saban's 7th national title. Thanks for watching. If you love J&D Productions, check out J&D Hoops, where we recently uploaded our first video. Go subscribe and hit that notifications bell, and follow us on Instagram and Twitter for more J&D. We read all of our DMs and love hearing what you have to say.